Hey, I'm Kay. Welcome to Kay's Chit-Chat, where your quiet thoughts become stories and your stories might help someone else feel less alone. The car pulled into the driveway at 6:15 p.m. James turned off the engine and just sat there for about 5 seconds. His hands were still on the steering wheel, feeling the last bit of warmth from the car. His throat was dry. His eyes stung a little. He blinked a few times, then opened the door and got out. The evening air was cool and nipped at his skin. He zipped up his jacket a bit higher, grabbed his work bag, and walked inside. The house was quiet. James dropped his keys into the wooden bowl on the entryway shelf. The familiar jingling sound echoed down the hall, but no one called back. He took off his shoes, his toes curling a little as they touched the cold tile floor. Leo wasn't home yet. The neighbor must have picked her up from school like always. He went straight to the bedroom. His shirt was wrinkled from a long day. He took off his tie and laid it on the back of a chair, his fingers brushing against the soft fabric. He took off his shirt, revealing an undershirt damp with sweat. His whole body ached dully, a pain that started between his shoulder blades and went down to his lower back. The kind of ache you get from sitting at a computer for too long without daring to take a break because there's still so much work left. He put on his house clothes, a pair of soft pants with a frayed hem and an old t-shirt with a faded spot on the collar. Once he was dressed, he felt a tiny bit lighter. He went downstairs to the kitchen. He opened the fridge and the cold air hit his face, making the tiny hairs on his arms stand up. James looked inside. Eggs, vegetables, a little bit of leftover ground meat from yesterday, a few of Leo's yogurts. He took everything out and set it on the clean granite countertop. His hands moved automatically. He didn't have to think. He put the pan on the stove, turned on the heat, added oil. He listened to the oil sizzle as it got hot. He chopped some garlic, the smell spreading through the kitchen, a little spicy in his nose. He stirred everything together, his eyes watching the meat turn from pink to brown. He added the vegetables, then the seasonings. Every move was smooth, like his body had done this 1,000 times before. No thinking, no feeling. But why did his shoulders still feel so heavy? He turned off the stove, scooped rice into 2 bowls, a big one for him, a smaller one for Leo. Emily's bowl stayed in the cabinet. Right then, the front door opened. "Dad!" Leo's voice rang out, bright and excited. The sound of little feet running into the kitchen, her backpack bumping against the door frame with a clunk. James turned around, a smile automatically spreading across his face. "There's my boy." Leo stood in front of him, her cheeks rosy from the cold wind, her eyes sparkling. She was breathing hard, her hair a little messy. James reached out and smoothed her hair, feeling how soft it was and a little damp with sweat from a day of running around. "Go wash your hands, it's time to eat." "Okay." Leo disappeared into the bathroom and James heard the water running. He carried the 2 bowls to the table, pulled out chairs, and put coasters in their usual spots. The yellow light from the pendant lamp above the table shone down on the shiny wood. They sat across from each other. Leo picked up her chopsticks but didn't grab any food. She looked at James, her lips pressed together just a little. "Dad?" Leo said, her voice small. "Is Mom coming home for dinner?" James was putting food into her bowl. His hand paused, just for a moment, but long enough for Leo to see. He looked up at the clock on the kitchen wall. The big hand was on the 6. The little hand had just passed the 7, 7:35 p.m. He felt something tighten in his chest. It didn't hurt exactly. It was just heavy, like swallowing a bite of food that was too big. "Mom's busy with a client meeting, sweetie," James said, his voice steady, like he was reading the weather forecast. "She'll be home later." Leo nodded and looked down at her food, but James could see she was eating slower than usual. They ate in silence. The only sounds were chopsticks clicking against bowls, the chewing of food, and the soft hum of the air conditioner in the corner. Every now and then, James would put more food into Leo's bowl, and Leo would look up and give him a small smile, just enough to show the little dimple on her left cheek, which looked exactly like Emily's. James looked at that dimple and felt his chest tighten a little more. After they finished, Leo cleared her own bowl and chopsticks and took them to the sink. She stood on her little step stool, turned on the water, and carefully washed them with her small hands. Water splashed on her face, and she giggled. James watched from a distance, not helping. He knew Leo liked to do this herself. She had learned to be independent early on, like she was trying to make up for something she was still too young to understand. By 9 o'clock, James got Leo ready for a bath. He stood outside the bathroom door, his back against the wall, listening to the sound of water and Leo humming some songs she learned at school. His hands were in his pockets, clenching and unclenching. After that, it was time for a story before bed. Leo lay under the covers, her eyes already getting droopy. James sat by the bed, holding the book, reading the words in a soft, low voice. He reached out to stroke her hair, his fingers running through the soft, slightly damp strands. "Dad," Leo whispered, "will Mom be home early tomorrow?" James stopped reading. He looked at his daughter's face in the dim orange light of the nightlight. Leo's eyes were almost closed, just a tiny slit open, but she was still waiting for an answer. "Yes," James said, "Mom will be home early tomorrow." He didn't know if he was lying, but his voice was calm and steady, as if it were the truth. Leo smiled, half asleep. Then she turned her face into her pillow, her breathing slowing, getting deeper. James turned off the light and closed Leo's door behind him. He stood in the dark hallway, one hand still on the doorknob, feeling the cool plastic under his palm. The hallway was silent. The whole house was silent. He went back downstairs and cleaned up the rest of the dishes. He washed each one, dried them, and put them away. He wiped the counter, wiped the stove, folded the dishcloth, and hung it on the hook. Everything was neat and clean. But the kitchen still felt cold. James sat down on the couch in the living room and turned on the TV, but with the sound off. The blue light from the screen flickered across his face. He rested his hands on his legs, feeling the weight of his body on the soft cushion. His back still hurt. His eyes stung more than before. 10 o'clock. A car pulled into the driveway. James heard the engine turn off. The car door closed, footsteps on the stone walkway. Each sound came through the living room window, crystal clear. He quickly turned off the TV and stood up. He hurried up the stairs, trying to keep his footsteps light. He went into the bedroom, pulled the covers over himself, and lay on his side, facing the window, his back to the door. He heard the door open. He heard Emily put her bag down on the dresser. Heard her let out a sigh, a tired sigh, but one that also sounded relieved to be home. Heard her footsteps as she moved around the room, the closet door opening, the sound of her getting things out. Then he heard the water running in the bathroom. James closed his eyes, trying to keep his breathing even. His body was still, except for his hand gripping the edge of the blanket. His fingers were tight, his palm a little sweaty. The water stopped. He heard Emily come out, the hairdryer running for a few minutes. Then it shut off. The bathroom light clicked off, leaving only the soft white glow of the nightstand lamp. James felt her get into bed. The other side of the mattress sank just a little. The familiar scent of her body wash filled the air. Lavender. The same kind she'd used for the past 7 years. His body tensed for a second, but he kept still. Then came the sound of her phone. Blue light from the screen swept across the wall in front of him, then disappeared. Scroll, scroll. Sometimes a soft laugh, very soft, from Emily. James didn't move. Finally, the phone clicked off. The light went out. Darkness filled the room. He heard Emily shift, adjust her pillow, and sigh one more time. Then silence. James opened his eyes. In the darkness, he stared at the curtain, where a faint sliver of light from the street lamp outside filtered through. His back still ached. His throat was still dry. His hand was still clenched around the edge of the blanket. The woman lying next to him was only an arm's length away. He could hear her breathing, slow, soft. The warmth from her body drifted over to him. So familiar he would recognize it in any dark room. But the distance between them on the wide bed felt bigger than ever. James closed his eyes. Neither of them said a word. They lay next to each other like two strangers. Today was Leo's 9th birthday. James had been planning for it. He woke up while it was still dark outside, while Emily was still sound asleep next to him. He slipped out of bed as quietly as he could, careful not to wake her. His feet touched the cold floor, his toes curling instinctively. He reached for a light jacket hanging on the back of a chair, shrugged it on, and closed the bedroom door behind him. In the kitchen, he turned on the light. The bright white light made him squint for a second, but his eyes adjusted. He opened the fridge and took out the ingredients one by one. Butter, eggs, milk, flour, sugar. He'd bought everything 2 days ago, and had checked the expiration dates on each one carefully. He started making the cake. His hands kneaded the dough, feeling it grow smooth and soft under his palms. Sweat dotted his forehead. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, breathing a little harder. But he didn't stop. He always made Leo's birthday cake himself, every year. He turned on the oven, and the little kitchen filled with warmth. The smell of butter and vanilla mixed together, sweet and cozy. James stood watching the cake through the glass door, waiting for it to rise and turn golden. He put his hands in his pockets and pulled out his phone. He opened his messages and typed, "Remember to come home early. It's your son's birthday." He sent it. His phone buzzed less than a minute later. He opened it, his heart beating a little faster. "Okay, I'll try." James looked at those 3 words. For a long moment, he looked again. "I'll try," she wrote, "I'll try." He put the phone back in his pocket. His palm was sweaty. The phone felt heavier than usual. That afternoon, James left work early. He stopped by a party supply store and picked out some blue balloons, Leo's favorite color. He blew them up one by one, tied the strings. The first few times, the string slipped from his fingers and the balloon shot up to the ceiling. He had to drag a chair over, climb up, and reach for it. His shoulder twinged from stretching too high. He hung streamers on the wall and put a happy birthday banner where everyone could see it. Leo loved bright colors and sparkly things. James knew this, and he wanted everything to be perfect today. His back hurt from bending over to tape the low corners. He straightened up, rubbing his lower back, feeling his joints pop. Everything was ready by 5 o'clock. The cake sat in the middle of the table with 9 small candles on top. White frosting, blue trim, and the words "Happy Birthday, Leo" that James had practiced writing several times before piping them onto the cake. The letters were a little crooked, but he figured it was okay. He looked around the living room. Balloons, streamers, confetti, all sparkling under the lights. It looked nice, but it was missing Leo's laughter. And it was missing. He looked at the clock, 5:30. He pulled out his phone again. No new messages. 6 o'clock. James picked up Leo from the neighbor's house. Leo ran out, her eyes bright, her backpack thumping against her hip as she moved. "Dad!" Leo gave him a big hug, the top of her head reaching just to his chest. "It's my birthday!" James bent down and smelled the kid shampoo in her hair. He hugged her back, feeling her weight in his arms, and for a moment, his chest felt warm. "Yeah, it's my boy's birthday." They walked home together. Leo squealed when she saw the balloons, the streamers, and the banner. She ran around the living room, touching everything, laughing nonstop. James stood there watching, the corners of his mouth turning up into a smile. But in his chest, a worry was growing, like the dough from this morning. Slowly rising, taking up more space. 7 o'clock. James put the cake on the table and lit the candles. Leo sat in front of the cake, staring at the unlit candles. Then she looked up at James. "Dad, where's Mom?" James was holding the lighter. His hand stopped. He put the lighter down and pulled out his phone. No new messages. "She'll be home soon," he said, keeping his voice as normal as he could. His phone buzzed. James pulled it out so fast he almost dropped it. The screen lit up. "I'm so sorry. An important client came up. I'll be late." He read the message again and again. His fingers gripped the edges of the phone, the tips turning white. His throat tightened like something was stuck in it. "Is Mom coming?" Leo asked, her voice smaller now. James looked at his daughter. Leo's eyes were still bright, but there was a change in the corners of them, a kind of childish sadness that was enough to make James's heart clench. "Mom's busy," James said, his voice a little rough. "She'll be home later." Leo nodded. She didn't ask anything else. 9 o'clock. Emily still wasn't home. James and Leo sat in front of the cake. The candles were still unlit. James waited, and waited some more. His hand rested on the table, his fingers tapping a soft, steady rhythm against the surface. "Dad," Leo said, her voice tiny, "let's blow out the candles." James looked at her. Leo was trying to smile, but her lips were pressed together, and her eyes were starting to get red. "Let's wait a little longer for Mom." James started, but his voice trailed off. "Mom's not coming, Dad," Leo said. This time, her voice didn't sound like a little kid's anymore. It echoed in the room full of balloons and streamers, like a fact that couldn't be ignored. James didn't say anything. He lit the candles. The match flared, a tiny flame. His hand trembled slightly as the candles lit one by one. 9 little flames flickered in the dim room, lighting up Leo's face. Her eyes wet with tears, her lips quivering, but still trying to hold a smile. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," James said, his voice cracking. Leo closed her eyes and put her hands together. In that quiet moment, she made a wish. Tears started to roll down her cheeks, dropping onto the table, soaking into the white tablecloth. She opened her eyes and blew out the candles. James clapped. His clapping echoed in the empty room, a hollow sound that faded against the walls. Leo turned and hugged him, burying her face in his chest. James felt her breath, the little sobs, her small body shaking. He held her tight, his arms wrapped around her, squeezing, like he could protect her from everything. But he knew there were some things he couldn't protect her from. "How about Dad cuts the cake?" James said, his voice back to normal, though his breathing was still heavy. Leo nodded and wiped her tears with the back of her hand. James picked up the knife. It cut through the soft frosting, dividing the cake in two. His movements were slow, careful, as if the cake was something fragile. He put a slice on a plate and pushed it toward Leo. Then he put another slice on a plate and placed it in the empty spot next to her, where Emily should have been sitting. That chair stayed empty. James looked at the cut cake, at the balloons still floating overhead, at the streamers still sparkling in the light, at Leo, who was bent over her cake, her shoulders still shaking a little. He felt like he was sitting inside a picture of a perfect family, but missing the most important piece. The little speaker was still playing Happy Birthday on repeat, an accidental reminder. James reached over and turned it off. The room went quiet again. All he could hear was Leo eating her cake, the clock ticking on the wall, and his own heart beating in his chest. Steady, but every beat heavy with something he couldn't name. One evening, James was helping Leo with her homework. They were sitting at the kitchen table, books and papers spread out in front of them. The warm yellow light from the pendant lamp made a small circle of brightness in the big room. Leo held her pencil, writing letters in her notebook. James sat beside her, his hand on the table, watching her write. The pencil made a soft scratching sound against the paper. James glanced at the clock, 7:30. He'd texted Emily at 5. "Coming home for dinner?" and got the usual reply, "Eating out. Just take care of Leo." He put the phone back in his pocket. His hand rested on his leg, feeling the soft fabric of his pants. His breathing was steady, but there was a heavy spot in the middle of his chest. That feeling like something was pressing down on his breastbone. Not painful, just heavy. Leo was working on the last math problem. James watched her concentrate, her head bent, her lips pressed together. She'd done almost all her homework already. She was good, hardworking. She didn't bother him, like a kid who had to grow up a little too fast. Suddenly, Leo put her pencil down. It rolled a little on the table and stopped at the edge of her notebook. Leo sat still, her small shoulders hunched. She wasn't looking at her homework anymore. She wasn't looking at James. James waited. He figured she was thinking about the math problem. 1 second, 2 seconds. 10 seconds passed. "Leo," James said softly. Leo kept her head down. Her voice came out tiny, like she was afraid the words would shatter if she spoke them too loud. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Does Mommy hate me?" The room seemed to freeze. For a moment, James couldn't breathe, his chest squeezed tight like an invisible hand was gripping his lungs. He could hear his own heartbeat thumping in his ears. Thump, 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 each beat pushing blood to his head, making him dizzy. "Mommy's never home," Leo went on, her voice still small but shaking. "Did I do something wrong, Dad?" James looked at his daughter. Leo still hadn't looked up. She was staring at her notebook, but her eyes were red, and her eyebrows were scrunched together. James moved without thinking. He pushed his chair back, the sound screeching against the floor. He stood up, walked around the table, and knelt down beside Leo. His knees hit the cold tile floor, the chill seeping through his pants. He put his hand on Leo's shoulder and felt her small body trembling. "Leo, look at me," James said. Leo slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were full of tears, but she was trying so hard not to let them fall. James saw his daughter's face in the yellow light, her pale cheeks, her pressed-together lips, her big round eyes holding something that no 8-year-old should have to hold. James pulled her into his arms. His arms wrapped around her, squeezing. He felt her quick, uneven breaths, the gasps that sounded like she was about to break. Leo pressed her face into his chest, and James felt a patch of his shirt grow wet. "No, sweetheart," James said, his voice rough and low. "Mommy loves you so much. She's just She's just really busy with work. Leo didn't say anything. She just held on tighter. James kept talking, but even he wasn't sure if he believed what he was saying. Mom works really hard to take care of our family. She doesn't hate you. Don't ever think that. His words hung in the empty room, sounding a little hollow. James said them, but inside another question was burning. Does Mommy hate me? He was afraid to answer that one. Odd. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark. Emily wasn't home yet. He'd put Leo to bed, reading her a story longer than usual, rubbing her back until she finally fell asleep in his arms. He'd pulled his arm out slowly, carefully, so he wouldn't wake her. His arm was stiff and numb from staying in one position so long, but he barely noticed. Now he lay in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling. 11 o'clock, 11:30, 12. His hand closed around his phone. He opened it, closed it, opened it, closed it. He wanted to text her, to call, to ask, "Where are you? When are you coming home? Your daughter asked if you hate her. Do you even know that?" But he didn't, because he already knew the answer would be, "I'm busy, don't make this a big deal." And he didn't want to hear that tonight. 12:15 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. James sat up, his back ached, his joints popping as he moved. He got dressed and walked out to the living room. His steps were slow, each one heavy, like walking through sand. The door opened. Emily walked in. Her hair was a little messy. The smell of perfume and restaurant smoke clung to her jacket. She saw James sitting on the couch, the living room lit by just one small lamp. "Why aren't you asleep?" Emily asked, kicking off her shoes. Her voice was tired, flat. "Sit down," James said. His voice was low, but there was something underneath it, something trying not to break. Emily looked at him, frowning slightly. She dropped her bag on a chair and sat down across from him. A small table sat between them, with a glass of water James had finished hours ago. "What's wrong?" Emily asked. James looked at her. In the dim light, he could see Emily's face was still pretty, but there were dark circles under her eyes, and the corners of her mouth looked tired. He used to love this woman. He still did. But sometimes he wondered if the woman sitting in front of him now was the same woman he married. "Can you please spend some time with our family?" James said, trying to keep his voice calm. But his hands, resting on his knees, were clenched tight, his fingers pressed together until they were white. Emily sighed, a long sigh, like she'd been waiting for this. "James, let me finish," James cut in. He could feel his breath getting hot, his chest rising and falling. "Today, your daughter asked me a question. She asked if her mother hates her." Emily went still. "She asked if her mother hates her because her mother is never home," James said, each word forced out of his throat. "She's 8 years old. She asked me that. Do you know what I was supposed to say?" James stared straight into Emily's eyes. He saw them widen, her lips part. But then she looked away. "I do everything for this family," Emily said, her voice rising. "You think I like working until midnight? You think I like dealing with difficult clients until I don't even have time to eat? I work hard so I can provide for Leo, for this house." "We don't need you to provide that much," James said. His voice was low, but there was a slight tremor at the end. "You don't need it?" Emily stood up, her hands slamming on the table. "You think your salary is enough for everything? You think—" "Just listen to me," James said, also standing. His arms hung at his sides, but his whole body was tense. "I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about our daughter. Leo needs her mother. She needs you home for dinner. She needs you to help her with homework. She needs you to be there to blow out birthday candles. She needs to know her mother doesn't hate her." "Here we go again." Emily's voice went cold. She stood in front of him, only an arm's length away, but James felt like they were standing on opposite ends of a bridge that was about to collapse. "I do everything for this family," Emily repeated, but this time it didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like a tired statement. "I go to work, I make money, I secure our daughter's future. Do you understand? I can't just stay home all day like—" She stopped. "Like him," she was going to say. "Like him." She didn't say it out loud, but the words hung in the air anyway, cold as the darkness around them. James felt them hit his chest, sharp like broken glass. Emily looked at him, her eyes tired. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. Her hair was a mess from the long day, and in the dim light, James noticed small lines around her eyes that he'd never seen before. "Don't make me out to be the bad guy," Emily said, her voice quieter now but still hard. "I'm just doing my job." She turned and walked into the bedroom. The door closed, not with a slam, but with a strange, quiet click, like she didn't have the energy to do anything more. James stood still in the living room. His arms hung at his sides, his fingers still curled, not wanting to unclench. His chest heaved as he breathed hard. He felt cold sweat running down his back, soaking his t-shirt. He stared at the closed door. Through it, he heard the familiar sound of the bathroom water running, the sound of footsteps he knew so well. The closet door opening, then closing. Then silence. James sat down on the couch, his back sinking into the cushion, his eyes on the ceiling. The living room still had some balloons left over from Leo's birthday, not so long ago. They were slowly deflating, hanging limply on the wall like forgotten promises. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw Leo's face when she'd asked that question. Her red-rimmed eyes, her small, trembling shoulders. And he saw Emily's face just now, her tired eyes, her words like a fence protecting something inside her. He sat there for a long time. He didn't know how long. He only knew that when he opened his eyes again, the living room lamp was still on, and beyond the closed bedroom door there was no sound. The house was silent, as if it had grown used to the silence. In the days that followed, the house felt heavy. James felt it as soon as he woke up the next morning. He opened his eyes, stared at the ceiling, and felt something pressing on his chest. It didn't hurt. It was just heavy. An invisible weight that filled the whole room, soaking into every piece of furniture, every corner. Emily still lay beside him, her back turned. The gap between them on the bed, which was already big, now felt even wider, even though neither of them had moved. James got up, brushed his teeth, and went downstairs to make coffee. He held the warm mug in his hands, but the heat wasn't enough to warm him up. He stood looking out the window. Outside, it was already bright. But inside, it still felt like nighttime. Emily started coming home earlier. Not midnight, not 11. Some nights she was home by 9, even 8:30. James thought this was a good sign. But then he realized, having her there was worse than having her gone. Emily sat on the couch, still in her coat, her eyes glued to her phone. Her fingers scrolled. The screen lit up her face in the dark living room. Her tired eyes still focused, the corners of her mouth sometimes twitching at some message. James sat next to her, a space between them. He watched her. His throat tightened, but he swallowed it down. "Did you eat?" he asked. "Yeah," Emily said, not looking up. "How was work?" "Fine." Silence, just the soft tapping sound of her finger on the glass screen. James sat there, his hands on his legs, his fingers clenching and unclenching without him realizing. He felt like he was sitting next to a stranger who smelled familiar, who sat in a familiar way, but whose eyes were looking into a different world, one he had no way to enter. "Do you want something to drink?" James asked after a while. "No thanks," Emily answered, still not looking. He stood up. His knees ached a little after a long day, and he got up awkwardly, like his body wasn't moving as smoothly as it used to. He went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared inside without really seeing anything. He grabbed a water bottle, opened it, and took a sip. The cold water went down his throat and made him shiver. He went back to the living room. Emily was still there in the same position. The blue light from her phone cast cold shadows on her face. James tried to create opportunities. One night after Leo was asleep, he sat down next to Emily. He put his hand on the back of the couch, near her shoulder, but he didn't touch her. He could feel the warmth coming off her body. But the distance was still there, like an invisible wall. "Emily," he said, his voice low. "Yeah?" She didn't look at him, but her fingers stopped scrolling. "Can we talk for a minute?" "About what?" Her voice was flat. James took a deep breath. His chest rose and fell. I want to know how you're doing. Are you tired? Is something going on at work that's making you, Oh, come on." Emily cut him off. For the first time, she turned to look at him. Her eyes were tired. "I'm coming home early now. What am I doing wrong now?" I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong," James said, keeping his voice calm, though his hands were clenched on his legs. "I just want to talk." "Talk about what? About me not being home enough? About me being on my phone?" Emily's voice started to rise. "I'm home early. I'm trying. What more do you want?" James said nothing. He looked at her. He looked into eyes that no longer had the softness they used to. He looked at her hands gripping the phone, her long fingers with the knuckles standing out from the tension. "I don't want anything," James said quietly. I just want us to talk, like we used to. Emily didn't answer. She looked at him for a moment, then looked away. Her fingers started scrolling again. I'm tired, she said, her voice back to normal but colder. I'm going to shower. She stood up and walked toward the bedroom. James stayed on the couch, watching her disappear behind the door. He heard the water running, and in his head, all the words he'd meant to say faded away, leaving nothing but emptiness. One weekend evening, James called Mark. Mark was his best friend from college. They used to play basketball together, stay up all night studying, be each other's best man at their weddings. Mark had been divorced for 2 years. James had never asked much about it. But now he found himself needing someone to talk to. They met at a small bar downtown. James got there early and sat in a corner, spinning his water glass. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt from work, his hair a little messy. He hadn't looked in the mirror before leaving, and he didn't care. Mark arrived and slapped him hard on the shoulder. You okay, man? You look pale. James gave a weak smile. I'm okay. They ordered drinks. Mark got beer. James just had water. He didn't want to drink. He needed a clear head. What's going on? Mark asked after a moment of silence. He looked at James with sharp eyes. You're not the type to call for a drink in the middle of the week. James looked at his glass. The ice was half melted and little cubes floating in the water. He spoke, his voice low. Emily, we're having problems. Mark said nothing. He just sat there waiting. James talked. He talked about lonely evenings, about Leo's birthday, about the question his daughter asked, about conversations that went nowhere. He talked about every detail, every feeling, the heaviness in his chest every time he came home, standing in the kitchen, listening to the silence, watching Emily on the couch, her eyes on her phone, feeling like she was further away when she was there than when she wasn't. As he talked, his voice started low, then got rougher. Sometimes he had to stop, take a sip of water, keep his throat from closing up. Mark listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick advice. He just sat there, holding his beer, watching James. When James was done, they sat in silence for a while. Music played in the bar, but James didn't hear any of it. All he heard was his own heartbeat, and the heavy feeling was still there, not getting any lighter even after he'd said it all out loud. Mark put his beer down and looked straight at James. You know, Mark said, his voice low, when me and my ex-wife were going through it, I was just like you. I sat there, I took it. I tried to talk, but everything just hit a wall. I thought it would get better if I was just patient. James looked at his friend. But there's one thing I didn't do, Mark said. I didn't find out what she was really doing. James frowned. What do you mean? What I mean is, Mark said, stressing each word, you're sitting there, watching her stare at her phone, come home late, avoid you. You're wondering why, but you're not looking for the answer. James felt cold sweat starting to run down his back. His palms were wet. Try to find out what she's really doing, Mark said. His voice was still low but firm. Don't just sit there. Those words echoed in James's head like a bucket of cold water. He sat frozen, his body stiff, feeling his heart pound hard in his chest. Not from fear, not from anger, but because deep down he knew Mark was right. James got home at 11. The house was dark. Leo had been asleep for a while. He walked into the living room and saw Emily still on the couch, still in her coat, still with her eyes on her phone. The blue light from the screen lit up her tired face. She didn't look at him when he walked in, didn't ask where he'd been, didn't say a word. James stood in the doorway, watching her. His body felt heavy. His legs felt frozen, like he couldn't take another step. He looked at the woman he used to love, the woman he'd promised to stay with forever, and felt the distance between them was bigger than ever. He didn't know where to start. Didn't know what question to ask first. Didn't know if the answer would break him. He just stood there in the dark of his own home, listening to Emily's fingers tap on the phone screen, tap, 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 like rain on a tin roof. Steady. Cold, never ending. In his head, Mark's words still echoed. Try to find out what she's really doing. Don't just sit there. James clenched his fists, his fingers digging into his palms until they turned white. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, and walked toward Emily. But then he stopped, because he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for the answer. He wasn't ready for the truth. He turned around and went upstairs. Each step felt heavy, like walking over broken glass that he wasn't ready to look at. And downstairs, Emily still sat there, her eyes on the screen, her fingers tapping steadily as if he'd never come home at all. James started paying closer attention to Emily. He wasn't doing it on purpose. But after his talk with Mark, everything around Emily seemed sharper in his eyes. The little details he used to miss, or pretended not to see, now showed up clearly, like cracks in a wall that had always been there but only showed when the light hit them right. He noticed the way Emily did her makeup every morning. Before, she'd just put on a little lipstick, fill in her eyebrows. 5 minutes, done. Now, she sat in front of the mirror for half an hour. James heard the hairdryer from the bathroom, the soft tap of makeup brushes on their cases, the sound of Emily trying on shoes, then taking them off, trying another pair. One morning, he happened to look through the crack in the bedroom door and saw her standing in front of the closet, holding 2 different shirts, looking back and forth in the mirror. She chose the black one, tight, with a lower neckline than she usually wore. James stood still behind the door. He didn't knock. He felt his chest start to get heavy again. It wasn't jealousy, it was worry. A slow, dull worry, like the ache in your joints before a storm. Then he noticed her perfume. Emily had a new perfume. James knew because the smell was completely different. Before, she used a light, flowery scent, the kind he still smelled on her pillow at night. Now her perfume was stronger, sexier. It lingered in the air longer. Every time she left the house, the room still held onto that scent, like a mark that wouldn't fade. James stood in the room after Emily had left for work, smelling her perfume still hanging in the air. His hand rested on the table, his fingers tapping softly on the wood. He asked himself, who is she dressing up for? Who is she getting pretty for? He was afraid to answer. One Saturday morning, Emily sat at the table, drinking coffee. She was wearing simple house clothes, her hair in a bun, no makeup. James sat across from her, holding his coffee, watching her. Without the lipstick, the eyeshadow, the tight clothes, Emily looked different. She looked tired. The dark circles under her eyes showed. The corners of her mouth drooped a little. Her skin looked dull. James had never seen her look like this on a normal morning. And then he realized this was the only face he saw on weekends, when she didn't have anywhere to go. On workdays, she left the house looking completely different, bright, young, like she was going to meet someone more important than a desk job at a bank. "Are you okay?" James asked. "Yeah," Emily answered, still looking at her coffee cup. "You've been coming home late a lot." "It's work." "Do you want me to pick you up?" Emily looked up at him. Something passed through her eyes. Annoyance or maybe avoidance? James couldn't tell, but he saw her frown a little. "No," she said, "just take care of Leo." James nodded and didn't say anything else, but his hand on his leg had clenched into a fist, his fingers pressing into his palm until it was white. Tuesday afternoon, James came home earlier than usual. Leo was still at the neighbor's house. The house was quiet. James put his keys on the shelf, took off his shoes, and went to the kitchen for water. He stood drinking it, looking out the window. The sky was getting dark, gray clouds rolling in. He walked into the living room and saw Emily's phone on the couch. It just sat there, screen dark, silent. James stood looking at it. His throat tightened. He knew he shouldn't look. He knew. But his feet wouldn't move. The phone lit up, a new message. James looked at the screen. The blue light hit his face, showing every tense line. The message appeared, just a few words, but enough to stop his heart for a moment. "Tonight, same place, 7 o'clock. Miss you. From 80. James froze. His body went stiff. His hand was still holding the water glass, but his fingers started to shake slightly, making the water ripple. He felt his heart. First it felt like it stopped, then it started pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat felt like a little punch to his chest. AD, 2 letters, 1 period. James didn't know who AD was. Emily had never mentioned that name. But the way it was written, short, familiar. "Miss you?" Those 2 words were like a small knife stabbing into the most sensitive spot in his heart. He put the glass down on the table. His hand was shaking so much the glass clinked against the wood. He stood there, his eyes still on the phone screen, the words still glowing in the dark room. In his head, 1,000 thoughts raced by, too fast to hold on to. Who is AD? A coworker? A client? Or... He didn't dare finish the thought. The screen went dark. The room went dark again. All he could hear was his heartbeat, his heavy breathing in the empty space. He looked at the phone sitting there on the couch. He could pick it up, open it, look at the other messages, find out the truth. But he didn't, because part of him still wanted to believe everything was okay, that the message was just a misunderstanding, that Emily was still the woman he married. But his heart already knew. It squeezed tight like an invisible hand was crushing it. A dull pain spread from his chest up to his neck, down to his hands, making his fingertips go numb. He swallowed, but his throat was too dry. He heard the door open. Emily walked in, carrying a shopping bag. Her strong perfume filled the room. She saw him standing in the middle of the living room, and she saw her phone on the couch. Her eyes narrowed a little. "You're home early?" she asked, her voice normal. James turned around. He tried to control his face, but he didn't know if he was succeeding. Cold sweat ran down his back, soaking his shirt. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Emily walked over, picked up her phone. Her fingers unlocked it, scrolled quickly. James stood watching her, feeling every second pass like a knife on his skin. She didn't say anything, didn't ask if he'd seen the message. She just put the phone in her pocket and walked toward the bedroom. "I have a dinner with a client tonight," she said without turning around. "I'll be late." James stood still. He didn't answer. He heard the bedroom door close, heard the closet open, hangers clinking together, heard the bathroom water run. He stood there in the dark living room, feeling his heart still squeezing tight. Who was AD? He didn't know, but his heart was squeezing, and in his chest, a quiet fear was growing. Not of losing Emily, but of facing the truth he'd been hiding from for so long. James couldn't take it anymore. 3 days had passed since he saw the message. 3 days of trying to act like nothing happened. He took Leo to school, cooked, cleaned, sat next to Emily on the couch while she stared at her phone. 3 days of telling himself he'd misunderstood, that AD was just a coworker, that the message meant nothing. But his body didn't believe the lie. He couldn't sleep. Every night he lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to Emily breathe beside him. His heart beat faster, his chest tight, his fingers gripping the edge of the blanket so hard his knuckles ached. Sometimes he felt like he was suffocating. He'd get up, go to the hallway, and take deep breaths to calm down. Saturday morning, James called his mom. "Mom, can Leo stay with you this weekend?" His mom's voice was cheerful. "Of course. It's been a while. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, me and Emily, we're just busy." He lied without blinking. His voice was calm, but the hand holding the phone was shaking. He looked at his hand, at his fingers that wouldn't stop trembling, and wondered when lying had become so easy. That afternoon, he took Leo to his mom's house. Leo hugged him tight before going in, her face pressed against his chest. "Will you pick me up early?" she asked. "Yes," James said, stroking her hair. "I'll be there early." Leo nodded, then ran inside, her backpack thumping against the doorframe. James stood watching her, and inside him a new pain started to form. The pain of a betrayal that wasn't just against him, but against the little girl who still believed her world was safe. James went home and changed clothes. He chose a dark shirt, something that would blend into the shadows. When he put it on, he looked at himself in the mirror and didn't recognize the man standing there. Dark circles under his eyes, face gaunt, lips pressed tight like he was holding back something about to break. He grabbed his keys and walked out. It was dark now. Streetlights were coming on, making long streaks on the wet pavement from the afternoon rain. He sat in his car, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the cold from the seat seep through his clothes. He waited. 6:30, Emily walked out of the house. James sat up straight, his back rigid, his shoulders tense like they were bracing for a punch. He watched Emily get in her car. She was wearing a black dress he'd never seen before, tight, showing her shape, nothing like her usual work clothes. Her hair was curled, falling over her shoulders. Her makeup was done carefully, her lips bright red. James watched her through the windshield and felt something cut into his chest. It wasn't jealousy, it was realization. She had never dressed up like that for him. Emily's car pulled out. James waited a few seconds, then started his engine and followed. He followed her through familiar streets, out of the neighborhood, and into the city. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his palms sweaty. He kept a good distance, close enough not to lose her, far enough not to be seen. Emily parked outside a fancy restaurant in a busy part of town. James parked across the street, turned off the engine, and sat still. He watched her get out of the car, adjust her dress, smooth her hair. Her movements were careful, practiced, like she was getting ready for a big date. James had never seen her put this much effort into her appearance. Not on their wedding day, not ever. And then he saw the man. A man stepped out of the restaurant. He was wearing a gray suit, tall, with salt and pepper hair. He walked toward Emily with a bright smile, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. Emily smiled back, and James recognized that smile. It had been a long time since he'd seen it. It wasn't the smile of a mother or a wife. It was the smile of a woman in love. The man opened his arms. Emily stepped into them. They hugged, not quickly, not awkwardly. The man's hands rested on her back, slid down to her waist, held her. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes closed, like that was where she wanted to be. James sat in his car, looking through the windshield. His body went numb. His hands were still on the steering wheel, but his fingers had gone stiff, no longer feeling anything. He felt blood rush to his head, hot, making his ears ring. His chest constricted, a sharp pain shooting from his breastbone up to his neck, down to his hands like someone was squeezing his heart. He couldn't breathe. His mouth opened, but no air came in. He sat there, both hands gripping the wheel, body frozen, eyes still fixed on the scene in front of him. Emily and the man walked into the restaurant hand in hand. James saw her look back at him and smile, and the man leaned down to whisper something in her ear. Emily laughed, playfully hitting his shoulder, an intimate gesture that hurt to watch. They disappeared behind the frosted glass door. James sat still. He stared at the closed door where Emily had vanished with that man. In his head, everything spun. He remembered every little detail. The late nights, the avoided eye contact, the new perfume, the nicer clothes, the miss you message. All the pieces finally fitting together into one complete picture. A picture of betrayal. James started to open his car door. His hand was on the handle, fingers tight, feeling the cold metal. He wanted to storm in, wanted to ask her, why? Who is that man? Do you know your daughter asked if you hated her? Do you know I've cried in the bathroom on the nights you didn't come home? Do you know how hard I've tried to hold this family together? But he didn't open the door. His fingers let go. His hand fell from the handle, dropping to his lap, heavy. His body felt like it had just been in a fight, sweat soaking his back, breath coming in gasps, every muscle aching from tension. He wasn't brave enough to go in. It wasn't about fear. It was knowing that if he walked in there, if he faced the truth in front of him, everything would break apart right then. And he wasn't ready to break. He took out his phone. His hands were shaking so much that he almost dropped it. He opened the camera, zoomed in, pointed it at the restaurant window. Through the frosted glass, he saw Emily and the man sitting close together. The man put his hand on Emily's hand, stroked it. Emily looked down and smiled. James hit record. He sat in his car, phone propped against the steering wheel, watching through the small screen. He recorded everything, Emily's smile, the man's eyes, their hands together, all the intimate gestures he'd never gotten from her in all these years. The video was 17 minutes long. He recorded until they stood up. The man helped Emily with her coat, his hand on her shoulder, pulling her close. James stopped recording. His hand dropped, the phone slipping from his grip onto the passenger seat. He sat frozen, staring through the windshield, but his eyes didn't see anything anymore. Everything in front of him blurred, melting into the darkness. James got home at 11. The house was pitch black. He didn't turn on the lights. He took off his shoes and put them on the shelf, but his hands were shaking so badly, one shoe fell to the floor with a loud clatter in the silence. He didn't pick it up. He walked into the living room and sat on the couch. His back rested against the cushion, but his body was still rigid. He put his hand to his face, wiped the sweat, and felt how hot his skin was, like he had a fever. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up, showing the last frame of the video. Emily and that man, hand in hand, walking out of the restaurant. James looked at the picture, looked at the woman he'd married 10 years ago, the woman he'd loved, the woman he'd promised to protect forever. He didn't know if he was crying. His face was wet, but he didn't feel the tears. He just felt emptiness, a huge hole in the middle of his chest where his heart used to be. He opened the video and watched it from the beginning. 17 minutes. He watched every second, every frame. His fingers gripped the phone tight, pressing into the edges until his knuckles were white. His lips were pressed together tight, like if he opened them, something would shatter beyond control. When the video ended, James didn't turn it off. He sat in the darkness, the phone still open to the recorded video. The screen glowed in the darkroom, lighting up his face, his red-rimmed eyes, his hollow cheeks, his cracked lips from clenching his jaw so hard. And he sat like that, not moving, in a house full of things but empty of warmth. He didn't know how long. He only knew that when he finally looked up and out the window, the sky was starting to get light. The first rays of sunlight came through the curtains, drawing pale lines on the floor. A new day was starting. But for James, everything had ended the moment he saw Emily step into that man's arms. James waited for Emily to come home. He had been sitting on the couch since before dawn. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't moved. His body felt like a rock, back straight, hands on his legs, his fingers still shaking a little. His eyes stared at nothing, red from no sleep, barely blinking. The light in the room changed from the gray of early morning to the pale yellow of morning to the harsh white of noon, then faded again as the afternoon wore on. James didn't look at the clock. He didn't know how much time had passed. He just sat there, in the room that still smelled like Emily's perfume from the night before, and waited. 7 in the evening, Emily came home, keys in the lock, the door opening, high heels on the tile floor. James heard every sound like they were amplified 100 times. He didn't turn his head. He sat still, hands on his legs, staring straight ahead. Emily walked into the living room. She was still wearing the black dress from last night, her hair a little messy, her lipstick faded. She saw James and stopped. "You didn't pick up Leo?" she asked, her voice normal, like everything was fine. James didn't answer. He slowly stood up. His body ached from sitting so long, his knees popped, his lower back spasmed. Blood rushed to his legs and made him dizzy for a second. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Emily looked at him, her eyes starting to change. A little worry, a little avoidance. "What are you doing?" she asked. James unlocked his phone, found the video. His hand shook. Not from fear, but from the emotion that had been building in his chest, now at its breaking point, like pressure in a pot about to explode. He held out the phone, opened the video, and put it on the table in front of Emily. The screen lit up. The image appeared, the fancy restaurant, the warm lights, and Emily, with her bright smile, holding hands with the man in the gray suit. Emily went pale. She looked at the screen, and the color drained from her face right in front of James, from pink to white, like someone had pulled all the blood out. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her hand grabbed the back of a chair, her fingers gripping so hard her knuckles showed through her skin. You followed me?" she said, her voice tight. "Answer me," James said. His voice was low, rough, like his throat had been scraped raw all night. "Who is he?" Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at the video still playing, the same images over and over, the intimate gestures, the hands held together. She put her hand to her face like she was trying to hide something. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was already shaking. James felt heat rising from his chest to his neck, to his face. His breathing got heavy. He clenched his teeth, his jaw so tight it ached. "Look at me," James said, each word pushed out through his teeth, "and tell me you don't know." Emily looked up. Her eyes were red, but not from regret. It was the fear of being caught. She looked at him for a second, 2 seconds, then looked away. "You don't understand," she said, her voice starting to rise. "He's just a coworker. We just had dinner." "A coworker," James repeated. His voice was flat, but his hands had clenched into fists, his fingers digging into his palms so hard his nails left marks. "A coworker you hold hands with, a coworker you look at like that, a coworker you text, 'miss you.'" Emily froze. She knew he'd seen the message. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice shifting from fear to something else. Anger. "Your phone lit up while I was standing next to it," James said. "I didn't have to look. It showed itself to me." "I don't believe you." Emily's voice shot up. She stood up straight, hands on her hips in a defensive stance. James looked at her, and in that moment, he realized she was getting ready for a fight. Not to save their family, not to fix anything, to protect herself. "You can't control me." Emily said, her words coming faster, like she was trying to run away from the truth with her own voice. You think I'm some machine? Just go to work, come home, cook, take care of the kid all day? I have a life too. James said nothing. He watched her, and her words were like needles piercing his skin. But he didn't flinch. He stood there, arms at his sides, body rigid, taking each one. You never understood me, Emily went on, her voice cracking like she didn't know if she was crying or yelling. All you do is demand. Demand I come home early, demand I stay here, demand I do this and that. Did you ever ask me what I want? Did you ever think about how I feel? Her voice echoed in the big living room, bouncing off the walls, the expensive furniture, the family photos on the wall, where they still smiled at each other from a moment that had passed long ago. You made me into a boring mother, a boring wife, Emily shouted, tears streaming down her face. I'm so tired of it. I want to feel like a woman. I want to be loved. I want it to live. James stood frozen. Emily's last words stabbed into his chest. You made me into a boring mother, a boring wife. He wanted to say that he had tried. He wanted to say that he'd waited for her every night, cooked for her, taken care of their daughter, tried to talk to her while she stared at her phone. He wanted to say that she was the one who had made him into an invisible husband. But the words wouldn't come. His throat closed up, not from emotion, but from anger. The anger that had been building for months, now rising, filling his chest, pushing up to his neck, his face, making his head burn. David makes me feel alive, Emily said, her voice quieter now, but still defiant. He understands me. He doesn't expect me to be anything but myself. James heard the name. David. A.D. He didn't know what he did next. His body moved before his brain could think. He walked toward the door. He reached for his jacket on the hook, but his fingers were shaking too much to grab it. The jacket fell to the floor. He didn't pick it up. He turned back to face Emily. They were just a few steps apart. He could see every tear on her face, every messy strand of hair, every smudge of lipstick. And he realized for the first time in a long time, he looked at her and didn't feel love. Then go, James said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room, heavy as stone. Emily stopped crying. She looked at him, her eyes wide. What? She asked. Go, James repeated, and this time his voice was louder. His chest heaved, his breath hot from his mouth and nose. Go get your feeling alive. Go to your David. Go. Did you hear me? James yelled. For the first time in years, he was yelling at her. His voice broke, rough and raw, but loud enough to make Emily step back. His body shook, not from cold, but from everything he'd held inside for so long, now spilling out, uncontrollable. He felt the veins in his neck pulsing, cold sweat running down his back, every muscle in his face tight. He was no longer patient James. Tolerant James. The James who sat, waiting in the dark. Don't come back, James shouted, and as the words left his mouth, he felt something in his chest shatter. Not his heart, but the last thread that had kept him tied to this woman, to this marriage. The room went silent. All that was left was James's heavy breathing, Emily's choked sobs, and the sound of the video still playing on the phone. An endless loop of smiles, held hands, and things that could never go back. Emily stood looking at him, her tears stopped. She didn't say anything, she just looked, and in her eyes, James saw something he'd never seen before. Not anger, not regret, but the realization that it was over. She turned and walked out of the living room. Her heels clicked on the tile, each step getting farther away. The bedroom door closed, then the closet opening. The sound of a suitcase, things being shoved inside. James stood in the middle of the living room, not moving. He looked at the balloons from Leo's birthday still on the wall, half deflated now, the streamers dusty. He looked at the couch where Emily used to sit for hours, phone in hand. He looked at the family photos on the wall, the smiling faces, the happy moments, all belonging to another life. The bedroom door opened. Emily came out, pulling a suitcase. She'd changed out of the black dress into regular clothes. Her face was wiped clean of tears, but her eyes were still red. She stopped and looked at James. Her lips moved, like she wanted to say something. James looked back, waiting, but she didn't say anything. She turned away and pulled the suitcase to the door. The door opened, hallway lights spilled in, and she stepped over the threshold. The suitcase rolled on the tile, making a thumping sound, getting farther and farther. The door closed. James stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the car start, the tires on the pavement, and then silence. He stood there, arms at his sides, chest rising and falling. The sweat on his back had gone cold, chilling him. His fingers were still curled, unable to straighten. He looked at the closed door, and in the house that suddenly felt bigger than ever, James heard his own heartbeat. Slower now, heavy, like it was also learning how to live without her. Emily had left after the fight. James knew it as soon as he woke up the next morning. He opened his eyes, looked beside him, and saw an empty bed. Emily's pillow was still there, but there was no dent from her head, no warmth. She hadn't come home. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness. It wasn't loud. It just quietly soaked into the wood, the fabric, every space she used to fill. He reached over to the other side of the bed and touched her pillow. The fabric was cold. The smell of lavender was gone. 2 days later, James picked up Leo from his grandma's house. On the drive home, Leo sat in the back, quiet. James looked in the rearview mirror and saw his daughter staring out the window, her eyes blank. Her hands were in her lap. She wasn't playing with any toys. She wasn't asking questions. When they got home, Leo walked in and looked around. She looked at the living room, the kitchen, up the stairs. She didn't ask anything. But James saw her small shoulders hunch a little, like she was bracing against a cold wind. James knelt down so he was at Leo's eye level. His knees hit the cold floor, the chill seeping through his pants. He put his hand on her shoulder and felt her small body trembling a little. "Leo," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." Leo looked at him. Her eyes were big and round, but they didn't have the innocence of an 8-year-old. They looked older, heavier, like she already knew what was coming. Mom's not going to live here anymore," James said, each word heavy as stone. "Mom and I, we decided to live apart." He waited for Leo to cry, to ask why, to beg to see her mom. But Leo just looked at him. A moment passed, then she nodded. "Okay," Leo said. Her voice was small but calm. "I know." She turned and walked up the stairs. James stayed on his knees on the floor, his arms still reaching out, like he was waiting for a hug that was never coming. His knees were numb. His throat was tight, no words coming out. Leo never asked about her mom again. From that day on, she never asked. In the days that followed, James fell into a deep sadness. He still did everything, took Leo to school, cooked, cleaned, did laundry. But everything ran on autopilot. He couldn't taste food anymore. He couldn't hear the water running when he washed dishes. He couldn't see the colors of the sky outside the window. Everything was dull, like someone had turned the volume of the world down to the lowest setting. He couldn't sleep. At night he lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark. His hand rested on the pillow beside him, where Emily used to sleep. He closed his eyes, trying to find the smell of lavender, but it was gone. All he could smell was clean laundry, sterile and cold. He couldn't eat. In the mornings, he made coffee and sat looking at the steaming cup. He lifted it to his mouth, but he couldn't swallow. His throat felt tight, like nothing could get through. He put the cup down and watched it grow cold. He blamed himself. Questions echoed in his head day after day, like a loop with no way out. What if I had done things differently? What if I hadn't yelled? What if I had been more patient, held on a little longer? Maybe she wouldn't have left. He thought about the nights he sat waiting for her, the words he held back, the times he wanted to hold her but didn't have the courage. He thought he had pushed her away. He thought it was all his fault. One morning, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the man looking back. Dark circles under his eyes, hollow cheeks, gray skin. He touched his face and felt how dry and hot it was. How many days had it been since he slept? He couldn't remember. Leo changed. She used to be full of energy, always talking, always laughing. Now she was quiet. Every morning, she woke up by herself, brushed her teeth by herself, got dressed by herself, went downstairs and got her own bowl and spoon. She ate breakfast alone. She didn't bother her dad. She did her homework alone. She didn't ask for help. At night, she took her own bath, read her own books, put herself to bed. James stood outside Leo's door, listening to her breathe evenly in her sleep. He wanted to open the door. He wanted to hold her. He wanted to say that everything would be okay. But he didn't. He just stood there, his hand on the doorknob, feeling the cold plastic under his palm, and didn't have the strength to turn it. One time, James saw Leo sitting in the living room holding a family photo, a picture from 2 years ago, all three of them smiling in the sunshine. Leo looked at her mom's face, her small fingers gently touching the glass. She wasn't crying, she was just looking. For a long time. James stood in the hallway, too afraid to step out. He felt his chest squeeze tight, painful, but there were no tears. He had run out of tears a long time ago. 10 days after Emily left, James got a letter from a law office. He was sitting in the kitchen, trying to eat a piece of bread. His hand held the bread, but he didn't bring it to his mouth. He just looked at it, his fingers squeezing lightly, feeling the hard crust. The doorbell rang. James stood up, his knees aching after days of barely moving. He opened the door and took an envelope from the delivery person. A white envelope, thick, with a law firm's name printed on it. He brought it to the kitchen and sat down. His hands shook as he tore it open. The papers inside smelled like fresh ink, sharp and emotionless. James read. It was divorce papers. He read every line, every word. The legal language was dry and cold, turning 10 years of marriage into terms, sections, numbers. He skimmed the parts about assets, about financial obligations, and then he got to the part about custody. His eyes stopped. Emily was not asking for custody. She agreed that James would raise Leo. She would have visitation rights on weekends, if her work schedule allowed. The words were typed neatly, no struggle, no argument. James read that line 3 times, and in his heart, 2 feelings mixed together, pain and relief. Pain that she didn't want to fight for her daughter, that Leo, the child she once held, sang to, stayed up with at night, was now just an item on a piece of paper, a simple line, not seeking custody. James looked at those words and felt a new kind of pain. Not his own pain, Leo's pain. The pain of a child not chosen by her mother, but also relief. Because James was afraid. He was afraid that if Emily fought for custody, if Leo had to live with her and that man, if his daughter had to grow up in a home where her mother had already left her long before she moved out, James was afraid of that. He was afraid Leo would have to see the things he had seen. He was afraid his daughter would have to ask questions with no answers. And now that fear was gone. James put the papers down on the table, and his hands were still shaking, but differently. Not from fear or pain. From relief, a fragile, broken feeling, but one that was starting to grow in the empty space in his chest. He looked out the kitchen window. Outside it was dark, but there were stars shining. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen stars. He sat there for a long time, the divorce papers in front of him, Leo sleeping upstairs, and in his heart, 2 feelings tangled together. Pain and relief, like 2 sides of the same coin. The price he had to pay for a truth he had been too afraid to face for years. Outside, the stars kept shining, cold but still bright. James went to the lawyer's office to sign the divorce papers. He wore a white shirt and black pants, like he was going to an important meeting. In front of the mirror, he adjusted his tie twice, his clumsy fingers working the familiar knot. The first time, it was crooked to the left. The second time, it was too tight, making it a little hard to breathe. He took it off and tied it a 3rd time. His hands weren't shaking. He was surprised by that. On the way there, he drove slowly, not in a hurry. His hands were on the steering wheel, his palms dry. He looked out the window and saw the trees along the road changing. New green leaves were starting to show after the cold winter. He had never noticed them before. The law office was on the 12th floor of a glass building. James stepped into the elevator, felt the light pull under his feet, a slight dizzy feeling. The doors opened onto a carpeted hallway, quiet. He walked down the hall, his shoes leaving prints in the thick carpet without making a sound. He saw Emily at the end of the hall. She was sitting on a waiting chair, holding a cup of coffee. She wore a cream-colored suit, her hair freshly cut, shorter, neater. Her makeup was perfect, nude lipstick, her nails carefully painted. She looked polished, elegant, like she was stepping out of a magazine, not waiting to sign divorce papers. But her eyes were different. James looked into her eyes and saw something, not regret, not guilt, something hazier, deeper, like a thin layer of mist on a lake after rain. She looked at him, and for that moment, James felt like she was actually seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time in a long time. "James," she said, her voice soft. "Emily," he answered. They sat next to each other in the waiting chairs, a space between them. Emily's lawyer, a woman with gold-rimmed glasses, came out and invited them into the room. It was a small meeting room, a shiny wood table, natural light from a big window, potted plants in the corners, green and carefree. The papers were ready. James looked at them, at the typed words, the agreed terms. No arguments, no fighting. Everything was clean, neat, emotionless. The lawyer explained each section. Her voice was even, professional. James listened, but he wasn't really listening. He looked at Emily. She was also looking at the papers, but he saw her hands tighten a little, her long fingers pressing into the table. When the lawyer finished, she handed them pens. James took the pen. It was heavy, metal, cold under his fingers. He uncapped it, hearing a soft click. He looked at the last page, the blank line waiting for his signature. He didn't hesitate. But before he put the pen down, he heard Emily's voice. "James!" He turned. She was looking at him. Her lips moved like she wanted to say something. In her eyes, the mist was thicker. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Her voice was small, like she was afraid the words would break if she said them louder. James looked at her. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry. He just looked and felt a strange calm in his chest. The calm after a storm, when the waves have gone, the sea is quiet, and all that's left is still water under a setting sun. "I'm not mad at you," James said. His voice was low and steady, like he had thought about these words for a long time, practiced them in his head 100 times, and now they came out as naturally as breathing. Emily looked at him, her eyes widening a little. "I just realized," James said, each word slow, "you were never really part of this family." She didn't say anything. Her lips trembled, but no tears came. She just looked at him, and James saw something in her eyes break. Very lightly, very softly, like a soap bubble touching water. He wasn't happy. He wasn't hurt. He just felt a truth had been spoken, and it was so light he wondered why he hadn't said it sooner. James bent down, put the pen to the paper. His fingers didn't shake. He wrote his name, each letter clear and final. James William Carter. The last stroke of the pen lifted, and he felt something in his chest end, not his heart. The waiting, the sleepless nights, the questions with no answers. The shadow of the woman who used to be his wife, used to be part of his life, and was now just a signature on a piece of paper. He put the pen down. Emily signed too. Her hand trembled slightly, but her handwriting was still pretty, still careful, like everything she did. James stood up. His knees were a little weak, but he stood straight. He looked at Emily one last time. She was still sitting, her hands still on the signed paper, her eyes staring into space. "Goodbye, Emily," James said. She looked up. "Goodbye, James." He turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him, soft, silent. He walked down the hall, into the elevator, out of the building. The sunlight hit his face, warm, making him squint. He stood on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. Spring air filled his lungs, fresh, smelling of new grass and wet earth. He felt his body get lighter, like an invisible rope had been cut, setting him free to walk. When he got home, James stood at the living room entrance and watched Leo playing. She was sitting on the floor, colorful Lego pieces spread out in front of her. She was building a car, the third or fourth one this week. James couldn't remember. She was focused, her small fingers carefully snapping pieces together. Her hair was a little long now, falling over her forehead. Sunlight from the window made a bright patch on the floor where she sat. James took off his shoes and walked softly into the room. He sat down on the floor next to Leo. Leo looked up at him, her eyes clear, not asking anything. She just looked, then smiled. "You're home," Leo said. "Yeah, I'm home." James looked at the Lego pieces in Leo's hands. A red wheel, a blue frame, tiny parts slowly becoming something whole. He didn't say anything more. He just sat there next to his daughter, watching her small fingers put the pieces together. After a while, Leo put the finished car down. She looked at it, then at James. "Are you tired, Dad?" Leo asked. James looked at her. Such a simple question, but it made his nose sting a little. He reached out and pulled Leo into his arms. Her small body pressed against his chest, warm. and James could feel her heartbeat, steady, soft, like waves on sand. He held her tight. His arms wrapped around her back, feeling each small bump of her spine through her shirt. His chin rested on top of her head, smelling the kid shampoo, the smell of childhood, of peace. "It's just going to be the two of us from now on," James said, his voice low and warm. "But I promise, we're going to be okay." Leo didn't say anything. She just pressed her face into his chest, and James felt her nod. Outside, the afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor, the colorful Lego pieces sparkling in the light. The house was still full of things, but now it was starting to have something else. Not the warmth of a perfect family, but the peace of a new beginning. Fragile, but real. James held his daughter in his arms, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. Normal, light, free. 6 months later, James woke up at 6 in the morning without an alarm. His body had gotten used to the new rhythm. He sat up, stretched, felt his joints pop softly. Sunlight came through the window, pale yellow, no longer the bitter cold of the winter past. He went downstairs, made coffee. The smell of roasted beans filled the kitchen. He poured 2 cups, one for himself, one to save for later. Then he realized he still had the habit of making 2 cups. He smiled to himself and poured the second one down the sink. New habits had formed. Saturday mornings were for grocery shopping with Leo. She liked carrying the basket, running ahead, calling out the names of vegetables. James followed behind, pushing the cart, watching her with a smile he couldn't wipe off his face. Sunday afternoons were for gardening, planting small flowers in pots by the front porch. Leo liked watering them, liked squeezing the dirt with her fingers, liked watching the new sprouts come up after each watering. James looked at the flowers slowly growing and felt his own life slowly growing too, in a different way. In the 4th month, James got a promotion at work. He got the news by email, sitting in front of his computer, reading the words over and over. Before, he would have gone home and waited to tell Emily. Now he called Leo and heard her voice shout through the phone, and his joy felt more complete. "You're so awesome, Dad," Leo said. "You promised me Legos, remember?" James laughed. "Yeah, I promised." James joined a single dads group in the 3rd month. At first, he didn't want to go. A coworker told him about it, said it helped him a lot after his divorce. James thought he didn't need it. He was fine, he told himself. But he went anyway, sat in a circle with other men, and listened to their stories, which sounded so much like his own. One man's wife left him for someone else. Another man's wife couldn't handle the money problems. Another man's wife didn't want kids. Another's wanted kids but couldn't have them. Every story was different, but they all had the same things in common: loneliness, pain, and trying to find themselves again. James sat and listened, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He started talking. His voice was shaky at first, but it got steadier. He talked about Emily, about the lonely nights, about Leo's birthday, about the question, "Does mommy hate me?" He talked about the video, the fight, the divorce papers. When he was done, the room was quiet. A man sitting across from him nodded, his eyes red. "You're strong, man," he said. James had never thought of himself as strong, but hearing those words, he felt something warm grow in his chest. One Sunday afternoon, James and Leo were gardening. Leo was kneeling in front of a pot of dirt, her small hands digging gently, her fingers covered in brown soil. She was carefully putting seeds into little holes, counting each one. James sat beside her, holding a watering can, watching her with a softness he had never felt before. The afternoon sun was golden, stretching across the grass, across the new flower pots, across Leo's hair, which had grown a little longer. The air was cool, smelling of wet earth and new grass. James took a deep breath and felt peace spreading through his chest. The doorbell rang. James put down the watering can and stood up. His knees ached a little from sitting so long, but he didn't notice. He walked to the door, wiping dirt off his pants as he went. He opened the door. Emily stood there. James recognized her right away, but he also saw how different she looked. She didn't have the polished, elegant look from 6 months ago. Her hair had grown back, but it wasn't styled, a little messy. She wore a simple t-shirt, jeans, no makeup. Her face was tired, dark circles under her eyes, her skin dull. She stood there, her hands gripping an old purse, and James saw that she looked much older than 6 months ago. "James," she said, her voice rough. "Emily," he answered. Silence, a long, heavy silence, like they were both searching for the words to say. James, Emily began, her voice shaking. David, he was already married. James wasn't surprised. He stood still, looking at her, hearing the pain in her voice. Not the pain of being betrayed. The pain of realizing she had lost something she could never get back. I didn't know, Emily said, her voice getting smaller. He said he was going to leave his wife, but then she stopped, her lips trembling. I want to see my daughter. James looked at her. He saw her red eyes. He saw her fingers gripping her purse strap so hard they were white. He saw her trying not to break apart. He felt no satisfaction. He felt no pity. He just saw a woman who had gone looking for happiness and found emptiness instead. He turned and went inside. Leo, he called. Small feet ran from the backyard. Leo appeared in the hallway, her hands still dirty, her hair a little messy. She saw her mother, and her feet stopped. James watched his daughter. Leo stood still, not running forward, not stepping back. She just stood there, looking at Emily with big, round eyes that showed no clear emotion. James saw the uncertainty in her, the uncertainty of a child who didn't know what to do with the woman who left her. Sweetheart, James said gently, Mom came to see you. Leo looked at her dad, then at her mom. Emily knelt down without thinking, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. She knelt on the doorstep, reaching her hands toward Leo, her eyes already full of tears. Leo, she said, her voice breaking, I'm so sorry. Leo still didn't move. She looked at her mother, at the tears running down her face, at the shaking hands reaching for her. And then she stepped forward. Not rushing, not running. She walked slowly, like she was measuring the distance between herself and the woman who used to be her mother. When she got close, she stopped and looked into Emily's eyes. Are you staying? Leo asked. Her voice was small, but clear. Emily looked at her daughter, tears falling. She shook her head. I can't, she said, choking on her words. But I will come visit you. I promise. Leo looked at her for a moment. Then she took one more step, reached out her arms, and hugged her mother. Her small body pressed against Emily, and Emily held her tight, her fingers gripping the back of Leo's shirt, like she was afraid her daughter would disappear if she let go. James watched. He watched Leo hold her mother. He watched Emily sob. He watched tears wet the shoulder of his daughter's shirt. He felt a dull ache in his chest, not jealousy, not longing, because he knew Leo needed this. He knew his daughter needed to hug her mother, needed to cry, needed to ask the question that had no answer. He stepped aside. He gave them space, moving back a few steps, standing in the shadow of the porch. The afternoon sun was still golden, stretching across the grass, across the new flower pots, across the three people standing in the yard, the crying mother, the daughter holding her, and the father standing to the side with a soft smile. Leo stood between her parents. She looked a little uncertain, not sure which way to turn, but she didn't let go of her mother's hand. Emily stayed on her knees, stroking her daughter's hair, her shaking fingers running through the long strands. James watched them, feeling the late afternoon sun warm his back. The warmth spread slowly, unhurried, like time itself was slowing down to make room for this moment. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if Emily would keep her promise. He didn't know if Leo would get hurt again. But in this moment, in the afternoon sun, among the new flower pots and the cool air of a regular Sunday, James felt like everything was where it should be. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And enough to begin again. James stood in the shadow of the porch, looking at his daughter and the woman who used to be his wife. He didn't step forward. He didn't step back. He just stood there, smiling, letting the moment pass on its own. Outside, the sun was slowly setting behind the trees, painting the yard gold. The new flower pots swayed gently in the evening breeze. And in the small house, where warmth had once been missing, there were now three people, no longer a family, but three people learning to be with each other in a different way. James took a deep breath. The cool air filled his lungs, smelling of wet earth, new grass, and something that felt like hope. Fragile, but real. He looked up at the sky as the colors shifted, and he felt ready. Ready for the days ahead. Ready for what he didn't know. Ready for the new life he and Leo were building. Day by day, flower pot by flower pot, meal by meal, slow but steady steps. The sun set. The first stars started to appear. And James, standing on the porch, smiled at the darkness slowly falling, because he knew that after the night, the sun would rise again.